Well, the premiers of Ontario and Alberta have signed a deal that says they're planning to look at ways to build energy projects, boost trade, and push back on some of Ottawa's regulations.
Through this agreement, we'll work together to explore ways to improve networks and corridors that better connect our energy and critical minerals to markets here at home, as well as international markets.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, who you were just listening to, signed two memorandums of understanding. And these promise to develop large-scale energy projects, including a railway for Ontario's Ring of Fire and new pipelines using Ontario steel. Now, the agreement also promises to support Alberta's wine and liquor industry and Canada's auto manufacturing industry. For a closer look at these agreements, I'm joined by Laurie Turnbull, political science professor at Dalhousie University. Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, these are two very ambitious memorandums, but they are not legally binding because they are only memorandums of understanding. So what do they do other than looking very official? I always call those signing binders like the keg menus because that's what they look like to me. But other than signing them in the keg menus, what does it actually look like?
Okay, so I'm not concerned that it's not legally binding because I don't think in this instance that that's what would happen, right? Like it's not that they're going to take that kind of path to this kind of agreement. I think what they're doing is responding to what the Prime Minister is putting out there in terms of the framework for the nation building projects framework, right? So like they're putting up a project, or they're putting up a framework that we could see a number of projects go through. And it looks to me that they're kind of setting themselves up to partner on things like energy, the development of critical minerals, pipelines. And they're saying, look, you know, Alberta and Ontario are going to make a point of supporting one another and doing what we need to do to get these projects up and running, and trying to, in where they can, act as partners where maybe foreign, you know, like U.S. partnership once was assured and now it's not. And so I think, you know, we will see maybe a little more of this type of thing, because I think this is what the Prime Minister wants. He wants premiers to put up possibilities for projects that then would be approved by the Nation Building Projects Office. But there isn't any specific project here. What it is a kind of an overall statement where there's, or two statements where they're saying we're going to partner on a series of projects that are, we're going to partner on things like energy, pipelines, critical minerals, and go from there.
You know, it was curious to see these two premiers come together, working together. But one of my thoughts was, what does this mean for pushback to anything from the federal government, from the Carney-Trudeaus, or south of the border? You've got two very strong, very outspoken premiers. One who's, you know, Premier Smith has sort of gone out on her own when it comes to working south of the border. Doug Ford has made a lot of appearances in media south of the border. But what does this mean for Prime Minister Carney when you've got these two premiers in particular saying we're joining forces?
Right. There's a lot to unpack, I think, about this partnership that's emerging between these two premiers, because they haven't been on the same side of things very much, honestly, since this whole thing started with Donald Trump.
Premier Ford criticized Danielle Smith for speaking out separately from the other premiers.
100%, right? Like Ford has gone in a very different direction than Smith has, but now it looks like they've found ways to team up and to be on the same side of things. And again, there's no specific project here, but there is a framework that's outlining a path for potentially lots of projects together. And so I think if you've got Ford and Smith on side for things, them being quite powerful around that table of premiers, it's going to be hard, you know, for other premiers to really get through in terms of saying, no, we don't want to do this kind of project. Of course, you know, Canadian politics, Canadian federalism is the way it is. Quebec has a very special place in Canada. But I wonder, you know, times, for example, when Quebec might indicate we're not interested in having a pipeline go through Quebec no matter what, you might see, you know, a Smith-Ford partnership saying, well, it's in the national interest, which could make it much easier for Prime Minister Carney to say we are going to push through on a project, even when some premiers aren't happy about it, because these two very powerful premiers have already set out a course for cooperation.
Yeah, I was curious about that. You know, it's also really interesting. These were done in the name of interprovincial trade, or at least sort of that was part of the umbrella that they came under. But when you just go back to Canada Day, it feels like a lot of passing the buck. Prime Minister Carney said, listen, we've taken care of all the federal regulations, provinces, it's up to you. But in that discussion yesterday, both premiers said, hey, Ottawa, we need you to do a little bit more. So we haven't really moved ahead any further, have we?
So I think as long as we are a Canadian federal system of government where there are 13, 10 provinces, 3 territories, and then the federal government, we've got 14 governments. As long as there is that, there is going to be buck passing, and there's going to be, okay, we've done this, now it's your turn. That's part of the negotiation. We're always going to see that. I'm not surprised by that. And I actually think that if Ford and Smith are really sitting down and committing to working together on these sorts of projects, this could be impactful because on some level, if Carney wanted to see a bunch of nation building projects and here's what we're going to put through this and it's going to get 2 years approval processes rather than 5 years, and this is critical to Carney's idea for economic transformation for the country, what if we had a circumstance where the premiers didn't agree on anything? And Carney said he's not going to force them. So what if we didn't have enough uptake? Whereas I think now we're seeing perhaps the opposite kind of thing where premiers are going to get together proactively and cooperate. And they're going to say, we're going to work together on a number of things. And here are the different really important things we might be able to work together on. Premiers might be thinking, look, we're going to shove everything we can up through that nation building projects framework because it's going to get federal support. It's going to get very much more quick approval times. And things like being able to get around the Impact Assessment Act. That's something that the premiers outlined in those MOUs yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
Nation building projects makes that possible. They're saying we'll do some bypasses around legislation. So I think this is what we're seeing is premiers stepping up to the plate saying, yeah, we want to get access to that projects framework.
Yeah, you bring up this example. Alberta Premier Smith has been calling on Ottawa repeal the greenhouse gas emissions cap. And now Premier Ford, rather than calling her a traitor for talking on U.S. media, is now supporting her in her efforts. So could Ford's support help move the needle for Smith?
Yes, 100%. I don't think that, not to be a jerk, but I don't think he's doing this for entirely altruistic reasons. I have heard that the Premier is also learning French, and I'm wondering if this is kind of part of his way of appealing across the country to Conservatives who might be interested in his leadership in a more national way. But nevertheless, this isn't a surprise, though. Even months ago when this all started and Trudeau, it was weird because Trudeau was on his way out. Ford was stepping up in that Captain Canada role. You remember that ball cap he was wearing?
Yep.
Like, this is the space he wants to play, and he's been doing it for a while. And this is, I think, a next step of that. But yes, to your question, of course, this could make it easier for premiers to talk openly about saying, we need to be a bit more, back and forth. We need to be a little bit looser maybe in the application of some of these rules around carbon footprint because now we're in a crisis. And Carney has been using the rhetoric of crisis, and he will continue to do that. And so, sure, this could make it so that Smith isn't the only premier or one of the only, 1 or 2 premiers who's saying, let's relax environmental and climate restrictions because we need to push economic growth projects forward.
In this era of deal-making and renegotiation, it is fascinating to see which political relationships are starting to emerge. Laurie Turnbull, political science professor at Dalhousie University. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, too. Take care.
If you like that video, make sure to subscribe to the Your Morning YouTube feed, where you can find all kinds of new content posted every weekday morning.